Hi, everybody. I hope you're really excited for this next session. It's going to be a panel hosted by the head of experiences at Oculus. We are going to be joined by some incredible creators in the community. We've got Paul from Felix and Paul, Yasmin, and Eliza. Eliza is part of Fistful of Stars, and Yasmin is part of Scatter. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things here. What it takes to create something in VR. What is it like to do something that's beyond just 360 filmmaking, but also live render material. You'll also have a chance to ask some questions at the end, so we're going to have a lot of time for you to actually engage with our panelists. So please give a really warm welcome to our team here today, and I hope you guys enjoy the session.
What do we click?
Okay.
Year 3.
So, where? What? Who's that? I don't know. Well, yeah. There we go.
Hi, everyone. So, at Oculus, on the experiences team, we focus completely and uniquely on producing non-games experiential content. So we spend a lot of time helping people tell stories in VR. And we also spend a lot of time just talking about the nature of narrative in VR, what is storytelling in VR with developers and producers like these guys and with each other. And we watch a lot of VR. And something that we believe to be true, I'm not sure if it's a controversial statement or not, but I think it's true, is that game design and interactive design in VR is significantly more of a solved problem than narrative or filmmaking in VR. And it's not that it's not incredibly technically challenging, but gamers and audience members for games are a natural fit for VR. There is no friction, there's no challenge, and there's no mystery to them about jumping into VR. First-person shooters, flight sims, all of the tropes of game design fit very instantaneously and naturally for VR. And also for game developers, the tools of VR creation are native. Real-time engines are second nature to game developers. And we think it's pretty different for filmmakers and for storytellers of other stripes. But we do think it's an incredibly interesting journey for those types of creatives to be taking into VR right now. Storytelling is like arguably the most ancient form we know for the expression and communication of ideas, and VR is this completely nascent, novel form for that expression. And it's a pretty exciting time for the creation of VR. So what I'd like to do before we jump into questions is have this group, who are a pretty amazing group of people, introduce themselves. But actually, right before I do that, let me just ask the group, who in here has experienced VR, has tried VR, if you don't mind, by show of hands. Yeah, that's about as expected. That's good to know. We've got the right crowd. And second of all, who's made something in VR? We'll discount the first 2 rows of Oculus employees, but that's good to know. That's also a pretty. So we're duly calibrated. That's really good to know. Cool. Okay. So let's go down the line and introduce ourselves. Want to jump in?
Yeah. All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Yasmin Alayat, and I am a partner and a creative director at a studio called Scatter. And Scatter, our work is, we call ourselves an immersive media studio, and we focus on documentary and nonfiction narratives. And our work, we call it volumetric filmmaking. Essentially, we build these documentaries in game engine environments using our own tools and cameras that volumetrically capture people and place them in the worlds that we construct. And so it's a hybrid approach to VR.
Paul.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm Paul Raphael. I'm a co-founder and a creative director at Felix and Paul Studios. We're a cinematic virtual reality studio. We've been doing stuff since 2013. We started with Strangers and have since done about 20 VR experiences in both fiction and nonfiction. And yeah, this is a photo of our latest piece, UB. It's a 40-minute scripted narrative. And yeah, that's it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eliza McNitt, and I am a writer, director, and creator of films and virtual reality. My VR experience, Fistful of Stars, is an exploration of the cosmos alongside the Hubble telescope, and it takes you on a journey inside of the Orion Nebula as you experience the birth, life, and death of a star. And this first had its world premiere for 6,000 people who did this experience all together, accompanied by a live space opera. So that's a little about me.
And are you, full disclosure, are you live streaming right now?
I am. I got this and I was so excited. So I am live streaming.
Just so we're all aware. Cool. So one of the things, in a panel that Megan Summers hosted yesterday about production and planning for VR, Julia from Tool said something that was characteristically incisive, and I wrote it down, and it was that an artist has to understand the canvas that they're painting on, and sculptors have to understand the properties of clay. And it made me think about, like, if you guys could each talk to us a little bit and talk to the group about your clay, like what is it about, you all have a grounding in somewhat traditional filmmaking, or certainly in imagery, creation of imagery. What is it about the craft in VR that has differed from those more traditional processes? But also, can you just take us through your creative process a little bit from start to finish? Yasmin, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. So I think process is a great question, and I don't know if there is a process right now that I can say that I stick to personally, but I do come from more of an experienced design background than traditional film, and I work in this intersection of technology and film and storytelling for actually the last 10 years. And the one thing that's been interesting about VR as a medium regarding process is using this idea of letting go of maybe so much control over a narrative and starting to move more into these, thinking of yourself as a designer or someone who is creating worlds, and you are controlling and giving constraints and rules to your audience. And I think that's the best way to think about it, or at least how I think about it when working on our documentaries, whether they are a little more linear or whether they're completely non-linear, very interactive, branching narratives. It's always about thinking of world building and rules and the different activation points. And then I think the main thing is thinking of it as a space to invite the audience in, and how they move through this world, and more than it is about creating a narrative. So I think we think about it as spaces that invite people in.
So my background originally wasn't film. I studied film. In fact, I was making films when I was a kid. And then shortly after graduating, that's not true, I quit. After leaving school, I met Felix and we started working together. We made a couple of films and short films and music videos and commercials, and I won't tell you the story about how we met, but there was this like crazy synergy, and we quickly kind of started feeling like there was too much brain power around a two-dimensional image, like a frame. We felt like we wanted to work together, but we were kind of getting bored. So that's what kind of brought us into more experiential, installation-based 3D projections and things like that, which ultimately, when VR came along, it was like, oh, this is what we're actually trying to do. So, throughout this was like maybe an 8-year process that led to VR. We really, we went through a pretty amazing but also intense unlearning process of not just having studied film, but having watched films our whole lives, and film having such a long sort of tradition and history. We kind of thought we were nuts doing some of the things we were doing at the time, kind of transgressing all these principles of storytelling and filmmaking. So when we started making VR in 2013, thankfully, we had already kind of gone through that, and I think it's something that if you're a filmmaker, you probably have to go through a version of that. I think maybe it's a little easier today because at the time there was no there wasn't anything like, what we were doing wasn't a set medium like VR. Like, these installations were pretty, wild things. We're like, well, why are we doing this? This is like almost career suicide. Whereas today, I think there's, a lot more incentive to just kind of be like, no, if you want to do this, you're gonna have to let go of a lot of stuff. So that's, what was the question? Process?
It was a bit process, but that was way more interesting.
So I came to virtual reality because it was really the only way to tell the story that I wanted to bring to audiences. And I was first approached by a performing arts organization to create a visual experience for space opera. And they told me that they wanted to make people feel as if they were floating through the cosmos. And I had no experience with creating virtual reality, but I felt as if that was, this was the only medium that could truly transport people to those worlds. And so I began the process of trying to discover myself how to tell a story through virtual reality, which meant that I snuck into the party for Oculus at Sundance and tried to find Yelena to get into a workshop they were doing at NYU, and got to learn from some of the most exciting creators in the space, like Mike Woods at Framestore and Sashka at Oculus, and truly began to understand that this was such a departure from the language of film, and it was really about creating worlds of discovery and planting Easter eggs for people to find. I think that's something that actually Sashka had told us. And so my process was really deconstructing everything I had known and learned in film school at NYU and sort of throwing that away and relearning everything as a process of discovery.
So something you just said, and Yasmin, something you were saying, I'd love for you guys to delve a little deeper into. You talked about the idea of sort of essentially spatial design as your narrative framework. So can you talk a little bit more about that and what it means in your process and how you go about that, and especially something people talk about a lot in VR is the paradox of allowing 6 degrees of freedom to the user, to the audience member, when you're trying to also tell them a story. Like, tell us a little more about spatial design, and Eliza, you mentioned it as well just now.
Yeah, of course. Like yourself, actually, Paul, I also come from the spatial, building installations, and I think the one thing when you are working in these types of spatial worlds, you embody the user, the audience member, and it's about telling stories through space experientially. It is designing in a way that is more like an architect, I would say, than it is, at least the way I see, than it is like storyboarding. And I think the biggest thing has always been sort of like treating each project as a different beast and this thing that's growing and a work in progress. I like to say always embrace being a work in progress, where every project has its own demands. And so, for example, 0 Days, which was the project that we are working with Oculus Studios on and was premiered at Sundance earlier this year, is about cyber warfare and how do you tell a story that was normally told as a talking head informational documentary about cyber warfare, and how do you transform it and flip it and tell it in a way that it really embraces VR in this medium and tell it from the perspective of code, of the virus itself. And so what is it, how do you approach building these worlds that are completely invented